The son of a rich man was humiliating a guy in front of everyone, thinking he was poor, and saying that beggars like you have no worth in front of us. But in reality, that guy was not poor at all. Rather, he was such a big man that no one had even imagined. Then, when the truth came out, something happened that no one could even think of in their dreams. Today, outside a stunning vintage building in Brooklyn, a scene was unfolding that would make anyone's blood run cold. Every single belonging from David's ancestral home, his memories, his grandfather's old coats, and priceless childhood photographs, was being ruthlessly thrown into the muddy street. 6 heavily built security guards from Silver Oak Bank were mercilessly emptying the house that David's grandfather, Richard, had built with his blood, sweat, and tears. David stood before those guards, folding his hands and begging. But their faces were as hard as stone. Just then, a gleaming black Mercedes SUV pulled up. The door opened and a man stepped out. It was Marcus, the incredibly arrogant and ruthless manager of Silver Oak Bank. Marcus wore a devilish smirk, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment for years. David ran toward him, his voice breaking violently from crying. "Marcus? Marcus, please listen to me. You can't do this. This house isn't just a structure of bricks and stones. It's the last memory of my grandfather. Just give me 6 months. I'll work day and night, but I'll pay back every single penny to the bank with interest. You know this, Marcus. Your father Thomas and my grandfather Richard started together in this city. They weren't just business partners. They were like brothers. For the sake of that old friendship, for the sake of humanity, please give me a little time." With trembling hands, David grabbed the sleeve of Marcus's suit. Marcus jerked David's hand away with absolute disgust and hatred, as if a filthy insect had just touched him. Pulling an expensive silk handkerchief from his pocket, he wiped his sleeve and spoke in a chilling tone. "Friendship? Humanity? You're standing there in rags trying to lecture a Wall Street banker about humanity? Your grandfather was a highly emotional and stupid man, David, who never understood the difference between friendship and business. And as for my father, he never shared any brotherhood with your grandfather. He simply used that foolish old man as a stepping stone to climb to the top." Marcus's words pierced David's chest like a dagger. Leaning close to David's face, soaking in his helplessness, Marcus sneered, "What do you think, David? Do you really think I'm doing all this just because of some nonsense bank policy? No, that's just an excuse. The truth is, your grandfather Richard's fake greatness and his success always burned my father's eyes. We hated the fame your family earned. Today, watching you beg in this mud, my father's old jealousy is finally getting its piece. Crushing street trash like you isn't our policy, it's our hobby." Marcus turned and signaled his chief of security. The guard stepped forward, grabbed David by the collar, and slammed him down onto the muddy sidewalk with full force. David's knees and elbows were scraped raw, but that physical pain was nothing compared to the mental trauma Marcus had just inflicted on him. "Throw all this garbage on the street right now and seal the doors," Marcus yelled his orders to his men and got back into his luxurious car. From behind the tinted windows, he looked at David like he was watching a defeated animal. The car drove off, splashing rainwater, leaving David entirely alone on the street amidst his scattered belongings. David picked up an old photograph of his grandfather from the ground, hugged it to his chest, and cried so loudly that even the roar of the torrential rain on that desolate street couldn't drown out his sobs. He had just discovered the horrific truth about his grandfather's decency and the betrayal he had faced, a truth that permanently killed the innocent, kind-hearted boy inside him. Sitting on the sidewalk, he kept recalling that old history between his grandfather, Richard, and Thomas, the very history that had forced him to wander the streets today. In those bitter flashbacks lay the golden era of New York City, a time when David's grandfather, Richard, was a name spoken with immense respect and power all across Wall Street. Richard was a highly successful, wealthy, and generous businessman whose empire spanned across America. Thomas, the father of that arrogant Marcus, used to be Richard's closest friend and business partner. The two had started their business together from a tiny room, but Richard's success, his vision, and the heights of his fame were so great that a web of jealousy and hatred clouded Thomas's eyes. It ate Thomas alive from the inside that the whole city saluted only Richard and viewed him merely as a partner. Burning in that fire of hatred, Thomas orchestrated a vile and dangerous conspiracy behind his back. He bought off the most cunning and corrupt lawyers in the city with massive bribes, forging documents to falsely claim Richard's entire wealth and companies overnight. Richard was completely unprepared for this sudden strike. The grief of losing his wealth and empire was nothing compared to the deep agony of being betrayed by his truest friend. Due to that long legal battle and the profound shock to his heart, Richard fell severely ill and became bedridden forever. Thomas left no stone unturned. He presented fake witnesses in court and hijacked everything. The trauma killed Richard, leaving the sole heir of a massive empire, innocent David, orphaned in his childhood and starving for every meal. Today, exactly 3 days after that eviction, David had taken shelter in a basement in Queens, lent to him for a few days by an old acquaintance. That night, and Marcus's venomous words, had permanently destroyed the simple, soft-hearted human inside David. Sitting on the floor of the basement, he was rummaging through his grandfather's leftover belongings. He was actually looking for some old insurance papers or ancient bank receipts to restart his life or secure a small loan. Moving aside old clothes and torn books, David's hand suddenly brushed against a very old, heavy iron box. This box used to be kept in the safest corner of Richard's closet, and David had never seen it opened in his entire childhood. The lock was rusted and extremely heavy. David grabbed a nearby iron pipe and smashed it against the lock with all his might. After 3 or 4 hard strikes, the lock broke and fell to the ground. As David lifted the heavy lid, a strange antique scent wafted out. There were no ordinary insurance papers or old photos inside. It contained something that neither David, nor the arrogant Marcus, nor his cunning father Thomas could have ever imagined in their wildest dreams. Inside the box lay an old leather diary, and right beneath it was a massive bundle of thick legal documents stamped with the red seals of America's top notaries and judges. On top was a letter addressed to David in his grandfather Richard's handwriting. Reading the words of the letter, the blood in David's veins began to boil like lava. Richard had written, "My dearest David, I figured out a long time ago that the cancer of greed had grown inside Thomas, and that one day he would surely betray me." The greed in his eyes couldn't hide from my sight. The buildings and lands he snatched from me by tangling me in legal hurdles were just an external, very small piece of my empire. While he was blinding himself with the arrogance of capturing my empty buildings, I quietly transferred my real empire, the majority shares of America's top 8 companies, into a secret and untouchable trust in your name. This box holds the documents for the 65%, 55%, and 70% absolute ownership shares of those 8 companies. The Silver Oak Bank and the companies that Thomas and his son arrogantly rule over today, the remote control to their board of directors still rests in your hands, in the form of these very papers. I hid all of this to keep you safe until you were old enough to understand the brutality of this world and the real game of corporate life. David's eyes went wide and his breathing grew heavy. His hands were shaking. He flipped through the legal documents one by one. This was no joke. This was no dream. He wasn't some beggar thrown out on the street. He was the real, absolute owner of the entire Silver Oak Corporation and all its affiliated multinational branches. Marcus's entire ego, his multi-million-dollar cars, his luxurious bank, all of it could turn to ashes at the snap of David's fingers. Nestled among those papers were also the concrete, classified evidence of Thomas's old fraud and forgery, evidence that could send their entire family straight behind bars overnight. David clutched those papers tightly to his chest. The eyes that were crying in helplessness and despair just days ago had completely dried up. He looked out the small basement window toward the glittering skyline and muttered, "Marcus, you made a massive mistake throwing me out on the street. Your father mistook my grandfather's decency for weakness. You people looted a dead empire and thought yourselves kings. Thomas thought he had captured the pawns. But he didn't know my grandfather had already signed the entire chessboard over to me. Now you will see that when the true heir returns to reclaim his kingdom, he doesn't just demand the crown, he takes heads. You took my identity, Marcus. Now I'm going to take your life and your whole American dream. You started this game, but I'm going to finish it." The sun rose with full brilliance in the New York sky that day. But an eclipse was about to hit Marcus and his father Thomas's empire, an eclipse they couldn't have imagined in their darkest nightmares. Cashing a few initial checks from the trust fund found in that old box, David raised an entire army of Manhattan's most ruthless and expensive corporate lawyers. When those elite attorneys saw the ironclad documents of the majority shares and the solid classified evidence of Thomas's fraud, even they were stunned for a moment. This was going to be the biggest and most brutal, silent, hostile takeover in the history of Wall Street. David gave them strict orders that he wouldn't go straight to court to file a case. Over the next few weeks, the chessboard was quietly laid out in the city's largest secret boardrooms. Thomas and Marcus were so blinded by their luxury parties and the fake prestige of their wealth that they had no clue the shareholders of the companies they thought they played God over had mutinied against them. One by one, David got the board members of all 8 multinational companies in his pocket. The legal nooses were tightened with such precision and silence that Thomas was left without a single door to escape through. Exactly 1 month later, on a busy Monday morning, a highly critical board meeting was underway at the headquarters of Silver Oak Bank. Standing in that magnificent glass boardroom on the 55th floor, Marcus was delivering an arrogant speech about the bank's multi-million-dollar profits. His father, Thomas, sat proudly in the largest chair, chest puffed out. Suddenly, the stock market figures on the meeting room's massive screen started flashing red. The bank's shares were plummeting violently, and all trading was halted. Before Marcus or Thomas could comprehend anything, the bank's panic alarms went off. Then the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open with a violent jolt. It wasn't an ordinary man who walked in. 7 or 8 elite lawyers in black suits and 4 heavily armed security bouncers marched inside. The aura of the true heir to that entire empire was clearly visible in his terrifying stride. "You? How did you get in here? Security? Throw this street trash insect out right now!" Marcus screamed like a madman. But no security guard stepped forward because David's lawyers had already handed the new ownership documents to the chief of security. Walking with extremely calm and measured steps, David reached the head of the massive table. He locked his eyes on Thomas, whose face had already turned pale at the sight of David. "Your guards are on my payroll now, Marcus." David's voice echoed like a bomb in that silent room. He violently slammed the old leather file and the original 70% share documents he was holding onto the table. "Thomas, the empire you built by stabbing my grandfather in the back, today, the true and absolute owner of that empire has come to claim what is his. These papers are the final nail in the coffin of your betrayal. My grandfather transferred these majority shares to my name in a secret trust that your bought-off dogs couldn't even sniff out." Thomas's hands and legs began to tremble. He saw the evidence of his past fraud in the papers on the table, and it felt as though his breath was failing him. Marcus was still blinded by his ego and screamed in desperation, "This is a lie! You can't kick us out of our own company! I'll destroy you, David!" David looked at Marcus with a chilling, ruthless smile and said, "Destroy? Marcus, remember, you said leadership only comes from wearing expensive suits. You said I was an insect, and crushing me was your policy? Today, I'm going to strip you of that suit and leave you standing barefoot on the street. I haven't just bought this bank. The control of all 7 of your companies is in my hands. All your bank accounts have been frozen, and the police are standing downstairs with warrants to arrest both of you for Thomas's years-old fraud." Hearing this, Marcus's entire ego shattered like glass. He realized the tables had completely turned. He and his father, Thomas, who were the kings of this city moments ago, had become street beggars in a single stroke. Stumbling out of his chair, Thomas fell to his knees in front of David. "David, forgive me, son. I was your grandfather's friend. For the sake of humanity, don't send us to jail. Give us a little time. We'll leave everything and go away." David looked at Thomas with the exact same mercilessness Marcus had shown him on that stormy night. "Humanity? Your son said my grandfather was a stupid man who didn't know the difference between friendship and business. Today, I am doing business, Thomas. And in my business, there is no policy for traitors like you." David turned back and signaled his bouncers. "Grab both of them by the collar and throw them down onto the street from this 55th floor, humiliated in front of everyone. And mind you, if they beg for mercy, remind them of my rainy night." Today they need to learn just how hard the ground is when you fall from the sky after your home is snatched away. Within minutes, Marcus and Thomas were dragged out in front of the entire company and the media, and thrown onto the exact same sidewalk where David had once shed his tears. Standing on the balcony of his grandfather's magnificent cabin, David looked down at the scene on the street. Today, the dice of fate had completely flipped. An orphan's life had changed forever, and the history of New York witnessed that when karma strikes, it reduces generations of arrogance to ashes in a single stroke.